So welcome to Care for Evergreen Shrubs and Trees. My name is Susan Ajay. I'm the community horticulture educator. And today with me, I have Lynn Cheney and Cecilia Lillard. Starting off, Lynn, you can take it away.
Evergreen trees and shrubs, like if they're planted in the right place, maintenance requirements are pretty low, but they can't be ignored. So we would like to go over a couple of things that you need to pay attention to keep your evergreens looking beautiful. Fertilization. Sometimes people get a little carried away with fertilization. How often should you fertilize evergreen shrub and trees? Well, the answer is they don't really need to be fertilized. Very often when you're fertilizing your lawn, that will take care of getting any nutrients into the roots of your evergreen tree. So the worst thing you can do is over fertilize, and it's very unlikely that you would need to add any. How much mulch should you put around your evergreen shrubs and trees? It's very important that you mulch because you have to remember evergreen trees do not go dormant in the winter. So they still need water, but they also need protection. And that would be protection from, say, string trimmers. If you're doing your lawn, you need to keep away from the base of the tree, because if you continue to hit the base of the tree with your tree trimmer or grass trimmer, you're going to do a number on it, and it very likely could die if you continue. Unfortunately, a lot of landscapers aren't careful with this. So by putting the mulch down, it keeps them away from the trunk. And then of course, as we know, mulching will retain moisture in the roots of the tree, which is very important for these evergreen trees. By adding mulch too, if you add a little bit of compost material, you're adding nutrients there. So again, no extra fertilization is needed. How do you properly mulch around your trees? Now, this is for all trees, deciduous, shrubs, for pretty much anything. You want an organic material. So wood chips, shredded wood chips, or even compost is okay. But what we're looking for is to retain moisture in the soil around your tree. So you want to put it in a donut shape, as you can see in the picture here. And the very, very important thing is not to pack your mulch up around the base of the tree. I see it everywhere. It just breaks my heart when I see it. And your tree may not die within a year or two, but it will eventually, you could very easily rot out the trunk of the tree at the base. In addition, in the wintertime, rodents will find this a very cozy place. And then to keep it out at the width of the crown. So this is so, when it does rain or precipitate, the water will drop down and be retained by the mulch. And then you want to know how deep to make it, about 2 to 4 inches deep. And this is a good way. This is enough to help shade and retain the moisture in the soil. So here's a picture of what not to do. You can see these trees are not going to be happy for very long. See the rodents on the right? They're going to love to hide in that mulch if it's too close to the tree trunk. So how often should you water? It's important when you're first planting a tree to pay attention to the amount of water it gets. So let me back up. How much watering? It definitely depends on the plant. It depends on the age and the species of the plant. If you have a well-established tree or shrub, it's certainly going to need a lot less watering. But if it's new, you're going to have to keep on top of it. The soil type, if you have soil that drains really well, a sandy type of soil, you're going to need to water more frequently. And of course, the weather and time of year. Although in the winter, you may think you don't need to water at all, but these trees do not go dormant. Evergreen trees do not go dormant. So you will still need to keep the moisture in the soil for them. Basically, you want to water until when the ground isn't frozen. So above about 40 degrees. Obviously, if you're watering a frozen ground, it's not going to do a whole lot. And drip systems are great. As you can see here on the right, this is a gator bag. So what this does is it slowly drips the water into the soil and allows the water to seep down deep into the roots as opposed to just pooling on the top. If it's not a brand new planted tree, feel down in the soil to see whether there's moisture down there. And so find a plant, not necessarily a shrub, but a plant that tends to get to wilt when it's not watered sufficiently. And that'll give you an idea of when you need to be watering your tree as well. So I thought that was a really good suggestion. And overhead watering, it is not recommended. Evergreens are susceptible to fungal diseases. And when you water overhead, it leaves the needles moist, which just invites the fungus to come on in and settle in. So definitely we do not recommend overhead watering.
All right, thanks, Lynn. Now we're gonna move on to pruning. So take it away, Cecilia.
Thanks, Susan. One of the questions we often get is what are the basics of pruning evergreen shrubs and trees? And evergreens come in two basic shapes, the randomly branched or the whorled, and you're going to prune those a little differently. Often when they come from the nursery, they have a great shape, so you don't need to do much, but occasionally you can get a damaged leader. Fixing that is really easy. You're just going to snip it off and then bring a lateral branch and stake it up to become the new leader. That's typically pretty easy to do. Now, when you prune evergreens, that area without the needles, if you cut there will never be any new needles. So you don't want to prune where there aren't needles. Now, pruning randomly branched evergreens. You're going to do this in the summer because they do most of their growing in the spring. So most of these aren't going to need much pruning, but you're going to prune early before the bud breaks. So that would be the only winter pruning you'd do. For whorled evergreens, they only grow once a year and they send out that whorl of branches. So growth happens at the ends of all those branches. So if you want to make it a little fuller, that's actually relatively easy. So in the early spring, you can see lots of little buds. You're going to let those grow for a little while. And then in late spring or early summer, you're going to see all that growth. And then you're going to just prune the ends off, as shown in the right slide. And that's going to make the tree much bushier and denser. Now, go ahead, Susan. If it's a pine tree, all those light colored parts are called candles. And you're not going to use a pruner with those, but you're going to break them in half with your hand. And that will also make the white pines much denser. If you prune those with a pruner, it's going to turn brown. Now, just like all trees, if you have a Christmas tree type tree, we do not want you to top it. If you top that tree, all those lateral leaders are going to take over and you're going to get a very misshapen tree, and there is absolutely no way to fix that. So just like any tree, we don't want you to top it. Now, lots of people have rhododendrons and azaleas. Rhododendrons are fairly easy to prune, and they should be pruned right after they flower. You should deadhead them. And you want to, like white pines, you want to break off the spent flowers, not prune them. If it's getting too leggy, you can prune at the base of the leaf whorl underneath where it flowered, and then it'll send up new buds as it grows. Rhododendrons have two types of buds. On the left is a flower bud, and on the right is a terminal bud. So after the flowers bloom, you're going to deadhead the flower bud. But if you want to make the bush denser, you're going to pinch off those terminal buds, and that'll make them branch out even more. Now, rhododendrons send out their flower buds only at the tips of their branches. So if you want to prune, you're going to prune down to a main branch. Azaleas put out flowers all along those branches, so you can prune those anywhere. Now, a lot of people have low ground cover evergreens, and as you can see, they're randomly branched, and they usually line paths. You do not want to cut a straight line. You'll see lots of dead ends of the evergreens. So if you want to prune those, you're going to cut them off at random lengths, and you'll get a much more natural looking evergreen.
All
I
right,
think
thanks.
that's
Thanks so
good.
much, Cecilia. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about winter protection. So, you know, a lot of people at this time of year are asking, do you need to do anything to protect your evergreen shrubs and trees? You know, winter is coming. So there are some things to worry about in the winter. So deer damage is a really big one. You know, some of your evergreen shrubs and trees might not experience much deer damage during the spring and summer when there's lots of food to eat. But in the wintertime, when there are the green things around, if you don't protect certain things like arborvitae, eastern red cedar, yews, the deer will come. I can't tell you how many rows of arborvitae I've seen that have this awful deer browse line on them. And so with a large tree like this, really, some fencing is really what you need to do. Repellents are just not gonna do it. You have to be out there too often. So what I would recommend is some kind of either deer fencing or chicken wire, something that's not, you know, so you can keep the aesthetics of the line of trees, but not risk that damage. And with a larger tree, you know, just putting a fence around it, making a circle around it with some fencing to prevent those deer from eating it, so that you continue to have a beautiful tree and not this really misshapen deer browsed tree. You know, sprays and repellents can work for some things, but especially in the wintertime, you have to be out there and you can't spray them at certain temperatures. So really, those physical barriers, you know, if it's a shorter shrub covering in burlap so the deer can't get at it, is also something that you can do. Another big issue in the winter is desiccation. So one of the things you want to do is avoid pruning in the fall, right? The pruning always spurs growth, and so that new growth is not going to have a time to harden off before the temperatures get cold. Another thing to do is think about placement. You know, planting your evergreens on the north and northeast sides of the building prevents them from getting a lot of that sun in the wintertime. There's less respiration, so they're losing less water. So they'll have less issues with desiccation. You know, as Lynn was saying, you know, it is necessary sometimes to water your evergreens in the wintertime, so keep tabs on them, especially the newly planted ones. For smaller trees and shrubs, such as boxwood, wrapping them in burlap is really helpful. It prevents it from getting all that sunshine, and also all the cold winds that are blowing also can help with the evapotranspiration from the leaves. Mulching thoroughly before the winter, that will also help against the heaving of the soil, but also will help retain that moisture. So when it does rain and or snow and the snow melts a little bit, it will keep all that moisture right in there. And then there are anti-desiccants that you can spray. This is not recommended for all of your evergreens. It's really a case-by-case basis. And if you do use it, make sure you follow instructions. You know, I don't think you can spray under 40 degrees. You're not supposed to spray if it's going to rain soon. And also, it's not good for leaves with waxy coating like Colorado blue spruce, because it will discolor the plants. Snow and ice damage. Hopefully we'll get lots of snow and ice this winter. I'm really excited, as are my kids. So if we do get a lot of snow and ice, it's really important for your evergreens that snow catches on all those needles and all those leaves. So if we get a lot of it, it can really do some damage. All that weight can break off branches. So if we are getting a lot of snow, it's recommended you go around and remove the snow, you know, brush it off, starting at the bottom as high as you can, just to remove that weight that's weighing them down. If you do have some damage, make sure you just kind of figure out what's going on. You know, some of the younger trees may actually, the weight of the snow may pull them out of the ground a little bit. So make sure you cover any exposed roots. And then, you know, prune off any of those limbs that are damaged. So you're getting rid of that damage on the tree. Then we're going to move on to some pest management. So there's lots of different pests. I'm just going to cover a few of them, ones that we get calls about all the time. So things that are definitely here and affect lots of people. So the number one pest is bagworms. So if you've never seen bagworms, you're very lucky, but this is what they look like. They're caterpillars, and they sew these silken sacks, and then they cover them with whatever they're growing on. So you can see this is covered with this plant that's growing on here. So they look different depending on what plant they're growing on. Yeah, so what damage do they do? So they're huge defoliators. So here is a tree that has almost been completely defoliated by bagworms. And with conifers, there's especially a problem because those but once you lose all those needles, they're not coming back, right? If this was a deciduous tree next year, you have a chance. But with conifers, it's just not going to happen. So it does lead, and I've seen the death of many conifers in my neighborhood from bagworms. So you should definitely be keeping an eye out. So really, you need to be scouting. And at this time of year is a great time to manually remove the bags. The eggs overwinter inside the bags. So pulling off the bags will remove eggs. So next year there'll be fewer that are going to come out on your tree. Now, if you have a very large tree that is infested, you may not be able to reach that high. So you may need to take some, use some insecticides in the springtime. So what we recommend is spraying with Bacillus thuringiensis. So that's a bacteria that affects caterpillar's gut and causes them to die. But it's really important that you spray right after egg hatch. So here's a newly hatched bagworm. And hatch takes place in late May to mid-June. So you need to be either keeping your eyes out, or luckily there's what's called a bagworm forecast, where the National Phenology Network actually tracks how the temperatures and can predict with quite good accuracy when they will emerge. So you can actually log on to their website and you can actually have them send you an email to warn you when they're going to be emerging. And so that's when you would need to spray. And if you have a larger tree, we'd highly recommend getting a certified arborist to spray those trees. You know, if you're talking about, 30-foot tree. Another big problem on conifers are sawflies. Again, these look like caterpillars, but are not caterpillars. They're actually closely related to ants, bees, and wasps. So this is an adult, and it kind of looks like a bee, except it doesn't have that waist. And this is them feeding on what looks like a pine tree. So how do you identify them? Well, one thing you look for is they're called sawflies because they basically saw through the plant material to lay their eggs, and they cause these egg scars on the needles. If you look up close, they have more than 5 abdominal legs. So here we have, this is a red-headed pine sawfly larvae. It has 7 legs here. So getting up close is how you'd have to identify it. But they're also smooth, with little or no hair. They're more than an inch long. You often see them in large groups because they feed together. They're usually only 1 generation per year, which is great, and they feed for 4 to 6 weeks and do extensive damage. So here is some defoliation caused by sawflies. This one only went after the old growth. They left the new growth alone, but this isn't going to come back, and your tree's going to look pretty ridiculous. And here is some white pines that were pretty much decimated by some sawflies. So what can you do to manage it? Well, scout your conifers often, right? So, once spring comes around, I think there's 7 different pine sawflies in the area, and some that are on other conifers. So just go out and look, because they feed in large groups. They're kind of easy to spot. If you find them early, you can just remove by hand. You can flick them into some soapy water. If there are certain branches that are just highly infested, you just prune that branch off. Or you can knock them down with some high pressure water spray. Things like BT, which are used for caterpillars, do not work on sawflies because they're not caterpillars. So which is why it's really important to identify what your pest is. But just keeping your eyes out will help you manage these. Then I want to talk about a fungal disease. This is probably the #1 disease I get calls about. When we get calls about on our garden helpline, it's called rhizosphere needlecast of spruce. So you can see it affects the old needles, right? You can see on this branch here, right? It started to lose all those old needles that turning brown, but the tips of them, the new growth is nice and green. So some symptoms of rhizosphere needlecast is the needles turn brown and fall off. It usually starts at the bottom of the tree. And that has to do with moisture, right? It's really nice and moist here. And to infect the needles, there has to be standing water on them. And so, here's where there's standing water, and so they affect it, and it kind of starts moving up the tree. It also splashes from the ground. That's how it gets spread. And it has these tiny black bumps in neat little rows on the needles, so you can kind of see them. You can see them with the naked eye, but if you have a hand lens or a magnifying glass, you can see them really well. And that's a positive IG for rhizosphere needlecast. So what can you do with this and other diseases? Just look at your trees, be aware of your trees. Something like a white pine, they do have needles that turn brown every year because they're putting out new needles. So just be aware of what's normal and what might be a problem. And then also plant disease tolerant trees, the right plant in the right place, right? Trees like the Colorado blue spruce, which is the most common tree to get rhizosphere needlecast, is not a good tree to plant here. This is nothing like Colorado. It's not the right climate for it. And so it has lots of issues. So think things that are native, think things that have some disease tolerance, and extension websites usually have lists of things that are resistant to these diseases. Then I'm maintaining good air circulation around trees. As I said, you know, moisture allows the fungal diseases to infect the trees. So in something where you have limbs all the way down to the ground, you might want to remove a few of those bottom limbs just so there's more air circulation. And then mulch under your trees so you don't have like grasses and other weeds growing up into the trees. And don't allow sprinklers to spray the needles, right? That's just going to keep them moist and just going to cause more issues. All right, so that's it for today. We talked about fertilizing, watering, mulching, pruning, winter protection, and pest management. I hope you enjoyed.